Israel just struck a port where Russian ships dock. And Russia did not stay quiet. A few days ago, the Israeli Defense Forces hit the port of Anzali, a port on the Caspian Sea where Iranian naval infrastructure sits alongside active Russian commercial and military operations. This was not a strike in Gaza, not Lebanon, not Syria. This was the Caspian Sea. And here is what makes this different from every other Israeli strike in this conflict. Russia uses that port. Russian ships dock there. Russian cargo moves through it. When Israel hit Anzali, it did not just hit Iran. It hit something Russia cares about directly. Within days, Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Maria Zakharova, one of the most senior voices in Russian foreign policy, issued a formal public statement. She said Israel's strike was reckless and irresponsible. She said Russia would not stand with its arms folded. And she said directly that actions like this will pull all Caspian Sea states into the conflict. That includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan. That is not a casual comment. That is a deliberate message from the Kremlin. To understand why this is significant, you need to understand what Anzali actually is. Most people think of this conflict as being centered on the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, or Gaza, but Anzali sits on the Caspian Sea, on Iran's northern coast, and it functions as the main connection point between Iran and Russia in that entire region. Russian vessels call at that port regularly. Grain moves through it, commercial cargo moves through it, and according to multiple reports, military equipment, including drones that Russia has used in Ukraine, has moved through that corridor as well. This is not a side road. This is one of the main arteries connecting Moscow and Tehran, and crucially, the United States never touched it. Washington, with all its pressure on Iran, kept its distance from Anzali. The Biden administration, despite sanctioning Iran heavily, did not strike that port directly. Netanyahu did. Now here is the part that most coverage misses entirely. The Caspian Sea is not an open ocean. It is technically a closed body of water, surrounded by 5 countries: Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia has maintained a very clear position on the Caspian. It is a zone of peace among its 5 coastal states. No outside military power operates there. No one disturbs that balance. That was the understood rule for over 3 decades. Israel is not one of those 5 states. When Israel launched a strike into that zone, regardless of the target being Iranian infrastructure, it crossed into a space that Russia considers part of its own strategic territory. The geopolitical comparison that comes to mind, it is similar to Ukraine striking a port in Crimea. Iran is not Russian territory, but Anzali is a corridor that Russia has invested in heavily, built up deliberately, and depends on both commercially and militarily. Striking it is not the same as striking a weapons depot in Syria. It is qualitatively different. Let us be precise about Russia's response, because precision matters here. Zakharova did not just make an off-the-cuff remark. She issued a formal statement on behalf of the Russian state. She said Israel's attack directly harms Russia's economic and military interests, specifically its food trade with Iran. She said Russia will not forget this. And she said this conflict will expand to the Caspian states if Israel continues. Now, calling this an ultimatum would be an overstatement. It is a formal warning. There is a difference. But when Zakharova speaks in this register, it carries the Kremlin's weight. She is not freelancing. The warning is real. The question is what comes next. And that brings us to something that happened 2 years ago, something that now looks very different in this context. About 2 years ago, Russia offered Iran a mutual defense treaty. The model was similar to what Russia signed with North Korea, a formal commitment that if one side is attacked, the other is obligated to respond militarily. Iran said no. The faction inside the Iranian parliament that still believed a deal with the West was possible pushed back against it. They did not want to be fully locked into the Russian orbit. They did not want to owe Moscow that kind of commitment, so the treaty was not signed. And here is the strategic consequence of that decision. Israel knows Iran does not have a Russian nuclear umbrella. It knows Russia has no legal obligation to defend Iran. And it has been operating on that basis, striking Iranian targets, Iranian assets, Iranian infrastructure, because the automatic trigger of a Russian military response does not exist. That is partly why Israel has been able to act with the level of freedom it has shown. But here is what changed. Attacking Iranian targets in Syria is one thing. Attacking a port where Russian ships dock is something else. Here is what Russia can actually do without firing a single missile from Russian soil. Russia could close Syrian airspace to Israeli aircraft. It has not done that. Despite years of Israeli strikes in Syria, many carried out with tacit Russian tolerance, Moscow has not closed that corridor. That could change. Russia could supply advanced air defense systems to Hezbollah, S-300 class systems. If those systems arrived in Lebanon, the operational picture for Israel's air force in the north changes significantly. Russia could accelerate arms transfers to Iran through channels that are harder to track or intercept. None of these require Russia to declare war. None of them require a formal military confrontation. All of them are within Russia's existing toolkit, and all of them become more likely if Israel continues operating inside the Caspian zone. The most important point here is this: Russia does not need to enter the conflict directly to change the outcome. It is enough to change what Iran and Hezbollah have access to. And there is one specific scenario involving those S-300 systems that analysts have been watching closely. We will come back to that. There is a larger commercial picture here that gets almost no attention in Western coverage. There is a north-south trade corridor, sometimes called the International North-South Transport Corridor, that connects the Indian Ocean through Iran, across the Caspian Sea, and up into Russia, and then into northern Europe. This route was developed specifically to reduce dependence on Western-controlled shipping lanes. It moves grain, it moves oil, it moves commercial goods. European economies, particularly in Eastern and Central Europe, depend on stable energy flows from the Caspian region. Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan both export heavily through that corridor. Any significant disruption to the Caspian, any escalation among its coastal states, has downstream effects on European energy markets. This is why Zakharova specifically named Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan in her statement. She was not being arbitrary. She was pointing to the economic weight that sits behind any conflict in that zone. When she says all Caspian states, she means it literally. And the consequences of that go far beyond the military dimension. It is worth being clear about what Israel likely intended with the Anzali strike. The stated framing was preemptive, targeting Iranian naval infrastructure that was being used to move weapons. That argument has a logic to it. Iran has been supplying drones and weapons that have been used against Israel and against Ukrainian infrastructure. Severing that supply chain is a stated Israeli strategic goal, but the execution created a problem that the stated goal does not resolve. Israel cannot close Anzali permanently. The port is large, multiple kilometers of docks, grain terminals, container facilities, joint installations. A strike can damage buildings, it can destroy some vessels, it cannot render the port non-functional for more than a short period, and Iran and Russia have alternative Caspian ports. The sea is large enough that routing can shift, so the military gain from the strike is limited, but the diplomatic and strategic cost, crossing a line that Russia had been watching carefully, is real and ongoing. The message Israel sent may not be the message Russia received. Now, this is the piece that most people are not connecting. After the Anzali strike, the calculus around that rejected mutual defense treaty looks different. Iran turned down Russia's offer when it still believed some version of a Western agreement was possible. That calculation has become harder to maintain. Iran has now absorbed multiple major Israeli strikes. Its air defense systems have been degraded. The deterrent picture has shifted. If Iran returns to Russia and says it is ready to sign, the strategic environment for Israel changes significantly, not because Russia enters the conflict directly, but because a formal treaty framework changes what Russia is willing to supply openly and on the record. That is the slow-moving consequence of the Anzali strike that is not captured in the immediate headlines. It is not about what Russia does this week. It is about where the Iran-Russia relationship sits 12 months from now. The reach of this story goes beyond the Middle East. The Caspian connects to European energy infrastructure. Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan are major exporters. Any instability in that zone affects global commodity markets: oil, grain, fertilizer. The Red Sea is already under pressure from Houthi operations. The Strait of Hormuz is a constant point of risk. If the Caspian becomes a third pressure point on global shipping and energy routes simultaneously, the market effects are not theoretical. This is a story about supply chains, energy security, and global trade as much as it is about military operations. Here are the realistic scenarios going forward, not predictions, but the most logical outcomes based on current signals. Scenario 1, Russia signals, Israel pauses. Russia's formal warning changes Israel's internal calculus. No further strikes near Caspian-linked infrastructure. The situation de-escalates at that level while the main conflict continues elsewhere. Scenario 2, Iran returns to the treaty offer. Faced with continued Israeli pressure and no Western deal in sight, Iran signals to Moscow that it wants to revisit the mutual defense framework. This does not mean war, it means a shift in the arms supply relationship. Scenario 3. S-300 systems appear in Lebanon. This is the scenario that would most directly change the operational picture for Israel. If Russia decides the cost of tolerance is too high and begins supplying advanced air defense systems to Hezbollah, northern Israel's strategic situation changes in ways that are hard to reverse quickly. None of these scenarios require a direct Russia-Israel military confrontation. All of them are more likely today than they were before the Anzali strike. The Anzali strike is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a shift. Russia was watching this conflict from a careful distance. It had interests aligned with Iran, but no formal obligation to defend it. It was tolerating Israeli operations in Syria. It was managing its relationship with Israel quietly. That distance just got shorter. Whether Israel intended to cross that line or calculated that Russia would absorb it, the response from Moscow suggests the Kremlin sees it differently. The warning Zakharova issued was precise and public. It named the Caspian states by name. It called the strike a threat to Russian economic and military interests. In geopolitical language, that is not noise, that is a signal. And when signals like this go unanswered, or when they are answered with more of the same, the situation tends to move in one direction. Watching what Israel does next in this space will tell us a great deal about where this conflict is actually heading. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, the kind that goes beyond the headline and looks at the actual strategic picture, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you catch every video. Drop a comment below. Do you think Israel will pull back from the Caspian, or is this just the beginning? I read every comment, and if this video helped you understand something the mainstream coverage missed, share it. That is the only way this kind of content reaches people who need it.